Tom had always liked the quiet mornings in his suburban neighborhood. He liked the smell of fresh coffee, the sight of dew on the grass, and the small routines that made life predictable. On most days, he could step outside, check his mail, grab a cup of coffee, and head to work without a single problem. But today was different. When he opened his front door and stepped onto the porch, he froze. A shiny black SUV was parked directly in front of his driveway, blocking him completely. He rubbed his eyes, thinking he must be seeing things wrong, but there it was, gleaming in the morning sun, not moving an inch. Tom immediately recognized the car. He knew who it belonged to. It was Karen, a neighbor who had always been difficult, someone who seemed to enjoy pushing boundaries. He had had a few small run-ins with her in the past, minor disagreements over lawn boundaries, noise complaints, and parking issues, but nothing serious. Still, seeing her SUV right in his way made him feel a familiar surge of frustration. He took a deep breath and tried to stay calm, knowing that losing his temper would only make things worse. He stepped forward and knocked gently on her window. Karen looked over, smiled, and waved casually. "Morning. Just grabbing a quick coffee," she said cheerfully without any intention of moving her car. Tom felt his patience slipping. "I really need to get out," he said politely. "Could you please move your car?" Karen laughed lightly and shook her head. "Oh, it won't take long. You'll just have to wait a few minutes." Tom knew she wasn't in any rush, and he was already running late. The small thrill of annoyance began to bubble into something stronger. He glanced at his watch. He had a meeting that could not be postponed, and being late was not an option. He tried calling the local parking authority, hoping someone could come quickly and get the car moved. But the person on the phone explained that it was private property, and there wasn't much they could do right away. Tom hung up, feeling helpless. He looked around his quiet street, hoping for a friendly face or another neighbor who might help. But everyone else seemed to be inside, oblivious to his struggle. His mind raced as he considered his options. Should he wait, risk being late, and let Karen get away with blocking his driveway again? Or should he try something more drastic? The thought alone made him uneasy. Minutes passed and Karen remained in her car. She finally stepped out, carrying a small bag, and started walking toward the coffee shop across the street. Tom seized the opportunity to get out of his own car, planning to move it slightly to create some space. But even as he approached, he saw her pause, look back, and smirk. That smirk felt like a challenge. She didn't move any faster, and Tom realized she was enjoying this. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Over the past few months, Karen had developed a habit of blocking his driveway occasionally. Sometimes it was for just a few minutes, but other times it stretched to hours. He had tried talking to her, explaining politely, but she always laughed it off or ignored him entirely. Every time he thought he had solved the problem peacefully, it resurfaced, leaving him feeling powerless. And now this morning it had happened again. His heart sank as he realized he might have to call his boss and explain why he was late once more. Tom retreated to his porch, running his hands through his hair. He hated confrontation, but he also hated feeling trapped. The SUV in front of his driveway represented more than just an inconvenience. It symbolized a lack of respect and consideration. He knew he needed to find a solution, and fast. He considered every legal option he could think of. He could call a tow service, but that would take time and might escalate the situation. He could leave a note on her windshield, but that seemed too passive for the way things had been escalating. As he sat down on his porch, trying to think of a peaceful solution, his eyes wandered to his garage. There against the wall was an old steel trap he had used years ago to manage the yard. It had been sitting there forgotten, gathering dust. It was heavy, solid, and strong. For some reason, the sight of it sparked an idea in his mind. He didn't know if it was a good idea or even safe, but he started imagining how it could be used to prevent cars from blocking his driveway. The thought made him feel a little stronger, a little more in control. He shook his head, trying to clear the idea away. He didn't want trouble. He didn't want to hurt anyone. But the frustration was real, gnawing at him with each passing minute. He remembered the first time Karen had blocked his driveway months ago, how helpless he felt then and how she had laughed as he fumed inside. The memory made his stomach churn. He wanted to be able to protect himself, to make sure this didn't keep happening. But he also didn't want to go down a path that could get him into serious trouble. The morning dragged on, and Karen returned to her SUV after her coffee. Tom watched as she settled back into her car, clearly in no hurry to leave. He clenched his fists, feeling the weight of his options. Waiting, calling authorities, trying to reason. None of it seemed to work anymore. It felt like she was testing him, daring him to lose his patience. Tom realized that the day could go one of two ways. He could let it continue, letting Karen feel victorious, or he could find a way to take control of the situation. The idea of taking control tempted him, even if it was risky. As he considered his next steps, he thought about the neighborhood around him. He liked living here because it was calm and friendly. Most neighbors respected each other in their spaces. But Karen's behavior threatened that peace. He didn't want to escalate things unnecessarily, but he also didn't want to be pushed around. Tom knew he had to make a decision, and that decision would set the tone for how the rest of the day would unfold. By now, the morning sun was fully up, and the streets were coming alive with people heading to work, kids walking to school, and dogs being walked by their owners. Tom observed all of this, thinking about how ordinary life continued around him, while he felt trapped by one person's actions. He realized that the frustration wasn't just about being late. It was about being powerless, about having no control over his own space. As he sat there, Tom began to plan. He would start by observing Karen's routine, figuring out when she tended to park in front of his driveway, and looking for moments when he could act without causing harm. He told himself he wouldn't make any rash decisions, but he wanted a solution that ensured his driveway was respected. The idea of using the steel trap lingered in his mind, not as a tool for destruction, but as a way to make sure this didn't happen again. It was a thought that brought him a mix of anxiety and determination. Tom knew that what he was about to do needed careful thought. He couldn't just act on impulse. If he did, he might cause more problems than he solved. He spent the rest of the morning watching, waiting, and thinking, noting Karen's habits and considering the safest way to handle the situation. He thought about calling neighbors for advice, but he didn't want to involve anyone unnecessarily. This was his problem to solve, and he had to do it carefully. By midday, Tom had a plan forming in his mind. It wasn't fully developed, but it was enough to give him a sense of control. He realized that the next time Karen blocked his driveway, he needed to be ready. He would need patience, precision, and calm thinking. The steel trap in his garage would be part of the plan, but he reminded himself that safety and legality were the most important concerns. As he sipped his coffee and watched the neighborhood hum with activity, Tom felt a strange mix of tension and anticipation. The morning had started with frustration and helplessness, but now he felt a small spark of determination. He knew that Karen's behavior wouldn't stop on its own, and if he wanted peace in his life, he had to take thoughtful action. He spent the rest of the day preparing mentally, considering all possible outcomes and rehearsing the patience he would need. Tomorrow would be different, he told himself. Tomorrow he would be ready to handle whatever came his way. The next few days were tense for Tom. Every morning he woke up with a mixture of anxiety and determination. He didn't know if Karen would block his driveway again, but he had learned to expect it. His mind constantly replayed the frustration of the last incident, the way she had laughed, and the helplessness he felt as he waited, unable to leave. Tom knew he couldn't let it happen again, and yet he had to think carefully. He didn't want to act recklessly, but the idea of finding a way to protect his space without causing serious trouble kept him awake at night. On the second morning, just as he had feared, Karen's SUV appeared in front of his driveway again. She had the same careless smile, waving at him as she stepped out and walked toward her destination. Tom clenched his fists and took a deep breath. He decided to observe quietly first, watching her routine and waiting for the right moment to act. This was a delicate situation. If he acted too soon, it could backfire, but if he did nothing, he would once again be trapped and late for work. He spent the morning noting her habits. Karen didn't just block his driveway randomly. There seemed to be a pattern. Some days she parked there for coffee, other days for errands, and sometimes she stayed for longer periods without any apparent reason. Tom began to record the times and lengths of her parking, hoping to understand the best moments to act without escalating things too much. As he wrote down his observations, he felt a small sense of control returning. Planning gave him confidence. Despite his careful planning, frustration kept building inside him. Each day he arrived at the porch to find his path blocked. He felt powerless. The usual calm of the neighborhood contrasted sharply with the tension in his own life. As neighbors walked by, waving and smiling, he felt the isolation of the problem. It was personal and only he could address it. His mind drifted to all the times he had tried to reason with Karen. Each attempt had been met with laughter or dismissal. He realized that logic alone would not solve this problem. Tom decided to revisit the old steel trap in his garage. It had been sitting unused for years, forgotten behind boxes and tools. Its weight and solidity now seemed like potential tools for creating a solution that didn't involve confrontation or legal trouble. He spent time inspecting it, thinking about how it could be placed safely to prevent Karen from blocking the driveway without causing harm. The thought of taking action, even cautiously, gave him a sense of empowerment he hadn't felt in weeks. He didn't want to hurt anyone, but he wanted to protect his space. Over the next few days, Tom experimented quietly with minor measures. He tried placing cones in the driveway to signal that parking was prohibited, but Karen ignored them. He considered calling more authorities, but the response was always slow, and the advice was limited because it was private property. He realized that he needed a more immediate, practical solution that didn't rely on others. This realization pushed him toward a careful plan involving the steel trap. But he told himself that patience and precision were essential. During this period, Tom also reflected on his own reactions. He didn't want to become someone who acted out of anger, someone who escalated conflict unnecessarily. He spent evenings thinking about how frustration could cloud judgment and how easy it was to let a minor inconvenience grow into a larger problem. He realized that this wasn't just about parking. It was about boundaries, respect, and self-control. Tom began practicing calmness, reminding himself that any action needed to be measured, thoughtful, and safe. He also thought about Karen. She was more than just a nuisance. She was a neighbor, someone who lived in the same community. Tom understood that people often act out of habit or ignorance rather than malice. He tried to consider her perspective, wondering why she seemed to take pleasure in obstructing others. Perhaps it was her way of asserting control, or maybe she simply didn't think it mattered. Understanding this didn't make it easier to deal with, but it helped Tom frame his response in a way that didn't become personal. By the middle of the week, Tom had refined his observations and begun to prepare quietly. He moved the steel trap to a location where it could be easily accessed if necessary, and he made sure it was stable and safe. He also practiced lifting it and positioning it carefully, knowing that any misstep could cause injury or damage. He wanted a solution that was protective rather than aggressive, a way to assert his boundaries without causing real harm. Planning and preparation became a kind of meditation for him, turning frustration into focus. As the days went on, the tension in Tom's life continued to build. Work was demanding, and the thought of being blocked in or late was stressful. Every morning, his first glance out the window determined the tone of the day. On some days, he was relieved to see the driveway clear. On others, his heart sank when the black SUV appeared. Despite this, he felt more in control than before. He knew that patience, observation, and preparation were key. His plan was not impulsive. It was deliberate, thoughtful, and focused on ensuring he could maintain his daily routine without unnecessary conflict. One afternoon, Tom took a walk around the neighborhood, observing how other residents handled minor disputes. He noticed neighbors giving each other space, resolving conflicts calmly, and respecting boundaries. He realized that this was possible even with difficult neighbors if approached with patience and care. This walk reminded him that the goal was not to win or punish Karen, but to create a situation where he could live peacefully without constantly feeling trapped. By the end of the week, Tom had a routine. He would wake up early, check the driveway, make notes about Karen's patterns, and keep the steel trap ready in case it became necessary. He was careful not to rush or act on impulse. His mental preparation gave him a sense of control and confidence that he had lacked at the beginning of the week. He knew the situation could still escalate, but he was ready to handle it calmly and safely. During this time, he also reflected on the importance of communication and community. Even though Karen had been difficult, he understood that escalating conflict could have long-term consequences. He decided that if an opportunity arose, he would attempt to speak with her again, calmly and clearly about respecting the driveway. But he also knew that if she continued to block it, he would have a prepared method to protect his space. The steel trap was not a weapon. It was a tool of protection, a way to assert boundaries without causing harm unnecessarily. The week ended with Tom feeling a mix of anticipation and anxiety. He didn't know when the next confrontation would occur, but he felt prepared. He had observed, planned, and practiced restraint. He understood the stakes, the risks, and the importance of measured action. As he went to bed that night, he felt a strange calmness. The tension of the past days had not disappeared, but it had been transformed into focus and readiness. He knew that the next encounter with Karen could test his patience and judgment, but he also knew he was no longer helpless. He had a plan, and he was ready to act thoughtfully when the moment came. The next morning, Tom woke up earlier than usual, his mind focused and alert. He had spent the previous week observing Karen's habits, noting when she tended to park in front of his driveway, and mentally rehearsing what he would do if it happened again. Today, he told himself he had to be ready. He couldn't afford to be late for work, and he couldn't continue feeling powerless. As he drank his coffee, he kept glancing at the driveway, his heart racing when he saw a familiar dark shape pull up, the black SUV, gleaming in the morning sun. Karen stepped out with the same careless smile, waving at him as if nothing was wrong. Tom felt a rush of frustration, but he forced himself to stay calm. He waited a few moments, watching her walk toward the coffee shop, making sure she was fully out of the car before taking any action. He reminded himself of the plan he had carefully constructed over the past week. The steel trap, placed strategically, would serve as a deterrent, a way to prevent future blockages without causing unnecessary harm. He knew he had to move carefully. One wrong step could lead to serious trouble. He approached the garage where the old steel trap had been positioned in a spot where it could be lifted safely. It was heavy, and he had practiced lifting it several times, so he was confident he could handle it without injury. Still, the weight of the task felt symbolic. This was not just about a car in a driveway. It was about taking control of his own space, asserting his boundaries, and reclaiming a sense of order in his life. He took a deep breath and lifted the trap, feeling the strain in his muscles but also a surge of determination. Carefully, he positioned the trap behind the SUV, making sure it was stable and secure. He told himself that the goal was not to damage the vehicle, only to create a barrier that would prevent future blockages. He double-checked everything, ensuring that the trap was placed safely without any risk to passers-by or neighbors. His mind raced with the possible consequences, but he reminded himself that careful planning and patience were his best tools. As he worked, he couldn't help but think back on the events of the past week. The repeated frustrations, the sense of helplessness, and the careful observations had all led to this moment. He felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. What if Karen came back too soon? What if the trap caused more trouble than intended? He knew there were risks, but he also felt a strange sense of empowerment. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he was in control of the situation. After positioning the trap, Tom stepped back to observe. Everything seemed stable. He watched from a distance, his heart pounding as Karen returned from the coffee shop unsuspecting. She climbed into her SUV, chatting on the phone, completely unaware of the barrier behind her wheels. Tom felt a sudden surge of tension. He had planned for control, not for confrontation. But the moment had arrived and he needed to stay calm and composed. As Karen started the engine and slowly backed up, a small shift of the trap occurred. Tom's stomach sank as he realized the weight of the trap had pressed against the vehicle more than he intended. There was a loud metallic sound as the SUV's rear undercarriage scraped against the trap. He froze, unsure of what to do next. This was not what he had planned. He hadn't wanted to cause damage, only to establish a boundary. Yet here he was, watching as the vehicle's lower body suffered a dent and the tires deflated slightly under the unexpected pressure. Karen's voice rose in shock and disbelief as she turned around to see what had happened. Her face turned red with anger and she ran toward her SUV, screaming about the damage. Tom felt his heart pound in his chest. The situation had escalated far beyond what he had imagined. He hadn't meant to total the SUV. He had only wanted to create a deterrent. Now he faced the immediate consequences of an unintentional accident. Fear and regret filled him as he considered the possible fallout. He stepped out carefully, keeping his hands visible to show he was not a threat. Karen's yelling intensified, drawing the attention of neighbors who began peeking from windows and doorways. Tom's mind raced, trying to figure out what to say and how to explain the situation without making it worse. He knew that running away or hiding would only make things worse, but staying and facing her meant confronting her anger directly. "It wasn't intentional," he called out, his voice calm but firm. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I was trying to prevent future blockages of the driveway. It was an accident." Karen's yelling didn't stop. She continued to shout, pulling out her phone and dialing 911. Tom's heart sank further. He had anticipated some reaction, but not a full-blown police involvement. He stepped back, keeping a safe distance, and waited for the authorities to arrive. The neighbors had gathered by now, murmuring among themselves. Some looked sympathetic toward Tom, remembering Karen's previous behavior, while others looked concerned about the escalating situation. Tom felt the weight of public scrutiny, but he knew he had to remain calm. He took a deep breath and reminded himself that he needed to explain the situation clearly when the police arrived. He couldn't rely on assumptions or half-explanations. He needed honesty and clarity. Within minutes, sirens could be heard in the distance, growing louder as the police approached. Tom's hands were still raised slightly, showing he meant no harm, and he waited patiently as the officers arrived and began assessing the scene. Karen was frantic, pointing at the SUV and recounting the damage in an agitated voice. Tom explained the series of frustrations, how the repeated blockages had led him to carefully plan a method to protect his driveway, and how the damage was unintentional. The officers listened, taking notes and asking questions to understand both perspectives. They examined the SUV and the steel trap carefully. The officers asked Tom about his prior experiences with Karen, whether there had been a pattern of disputes, and if any threats or confrontations had occurred. Tom answered honestly, recounting the repeated blockages and his attempts to resolve the situation peacefully. He emphasized that his actions were cautious, intended to prevent further conflict, and never meant to harm property. The officers nodded, noting the distinction between negligence and malicious intent. Karen, on the other hand, was furious. She insisted that Tom had acted deliberately and demanded that he be charged. The officers remained neutral, reminding her that intent was an important factor in assessing the situation. Tom felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Relief that the police were listening to his side, anxiety about the potential consequences of the accident. He knew the legal system could be slow and complicated, and he needed to be prepared for all outcomes. As the scene settled, the officers suggested that Tom and Karen begin a discussion about resolving the damages. They explained that insurance might cover the vehicle's repair costs, and any personal settlement would help avoid prolonged conflict. Tom agreed, realizing that this was the most responsible course of action. He also understood that patience and clear communication would be essential moving forward. Karen's anger was still high, but the immediate danger of further escalation had been mitigated. Once the police left, Tom reflected on the incident. He hadn't meant for the SUV to be damaged, and he felt genuine remorse. The steel trap, while intended as a preventive measure, had unexpectedly caused harm. Tom understood that frustration and careful planning, while necessary to assert boundaries, could also have unintended consequences. The experience was a harsh reminder that even the most measured actions could escalate in unpredictable ways. Despite the stress and fear, Tom also recognized a small victory. He had not acted recklessly or violently. He had remained calm, cooperative, and honest with the authorities. He had faced the immediate consequences responsibly. The incident, though unfortunate, became a lesson in caution, patience, and careful planning. He knew that moving forward he would need to find safer, legal ways to protect his space without risking property damage or personal conflict. The day ended with Tom exhausted but thoughtful. He had faced his fear, confronted a difficult situation, and navigated a complex problem with careful attention. The steel trap had served as a symbol of his desire to reclaim control, even if the results had been more serious than expected. Tom promised himself that he would learn from this experience, taking away lessons about patience, planning, and the importance of considering all possible outcomes before acting. The morning's tension had transformed into insight, preparing him for the challenges still to come. After the police left, the tension between Tom and Karen did not immediately dissipate. Karen was furious, pacing in front of the damaged SUV and muttering under her breath about how unfair it all was. Tom, on the other hand, felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Relief that he had remained calm and explained himself, and anxiety over the potential legal and financial consequences of the incident. He knew that even if the police had been fair, the situation was far from over. Tom spent the next few hours carefully considering his options. He could wait for Karen to file an official claim, or he could try to settle things directly with her. He decided that direct communication might prevent the situation from escalating further. Gathering his courage, he approached her calmly, making sure to keep his hands visible and his tone neutral. "Karen, I want to find a way to resolve this," he said. "I didn't mean for this to happen, and I'm willing to help fix it." Karen glared at him, her anger still raw, but she was listening. They sat down on the curb near the SUV and began discussing possible solutions. Karen demanded that Tom pay for the entire repair, but Tom explained that he had not intended to cause damage, and that some responsibility might be shared due to the unusual circumstances. He suggested involving their insurance companies to assess the damage and determine the most fair course of action. Karen was hesitant at first, but eventually agreed to this plan. It was clear to both of them that further confrontation would only make things worse, and cooperating seemed like the best way to protect their own interests. While waiting for the insurance adjuster, Tom reflected on the events of the past week. The constant frustration, the careful planning, and the moment when the trap shifted unexpectedly had all led to this intense situation. He realized that frustration can cloud judgment, even when intentions are good. He understood that while he had acted cautiously, accidents could still happen and the consequences could be serious. This realization weighed heavily on him, but it also gave him a sense of clarity about how to handle conflicts in the future. The insurance adjuster arrived later that afternoon. He examined the SUV carefully, documenting the damage and taking photographs. Tom explained what had happened, emphasizing that the damage was unintentional and that he had been trying to prevent future blockages of his driveway. Karen spoke as well, expressing her frustration and anger. The adjuster listened to both sides and explained that the insurance would likely cover the repairs, but there might be some deductible or shared responsibility. This news relieved Tom slightly, but he knew the situation would require ongoing communication and patience. Over the next few days, Tom focused on restoring a sense of normalcy in his life. He installed a small legal barrier in front of his driveway to prevent future blockages. It wasn't intrusive or aggressive, but it clearly signaled that parking there was not allowed. He also placed a polite sign requesting that neighbors respect his driveway. This solution allowed him to feel secure without escalating tensions with Karen or other neighbors. He understood that patience and careful planning were more effective than confrontation. Tom also reflected on his own reactions during the incident. He realized that he had let frustration build up over time, which had contributed to the accident. He understood the importance of addressing conflicts early and calmly, rather than letting them grow until they became unmanageable. This lesson was valuable not only for interactions with Karen, but for all aspects of life. He vowed to approach future disputes with a clear mind and measured actions, avoiding impulsive decisions that could have unintended consequences. As for Karen, she eventually calmed down, though she remained wary of Tom. Over time, the tension between them decreased as both recognized the importance of maintaining peace in the neighborhood. They learned to coexist without further incidents, understanding that mutual respect and clear boundaries were essential. The SUV incident became a cautionary tale for both of them, a reminder that even small conflicts can escalate if not handled carefully. Tom also found that the experience had strengthened his problem-solving skills. He had been forced to think strategically, consider multiple outcomes, and remain calm under pressure. These skills proved useful in other areas of his life, including work and personal relationships. He realized that challenges, while stressful, could also be opportunities for growth and learning. By reflecting on the incident and learning from it, he turned a difficult experience into a valuable lesson. The neighborhood slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Neighbors who had witnessed the incident occasionally commented on it, some with sympathy for Tom and others with amusement at the unusual series of events. Tom remained polite and professional in all interactions, never letting the incident define his relationships with others. He understood that maintaining a calm and composed demeanor was essential for long-term peace and respect within the community. In the weeks that followed, Tom continued to observe the neighborhood and monitor the driveway. The barrier and sign proved effective, and he rarely had to worry about blockages. He felt a renewed sense of control over his own space and a deeper understanding of how to handle conflicts constructively. The experience with Karen had been challenging, but it ultimately strengthened his confidence and resilience. He knew that future challenges could arise, but he felt better prepared to face them with patience, careful planning, and a focus on safety and respect. By the end of the month, Tom had fully processed the incident. He no longer felt the constant tension and anxiety that had plagued him in the days leading up to the accident. He had learned the importance of proactive measures, clear communication, and thoughtful planning. The steel trap, once a symbol of potential conflict, had served as a reminder of the need for caution and preparation. Tom's experience became a personal story of growth, patience, and the power of measured action in resolving disputes.